Hey, Nubians, we are here in the Maroon Medicine Kitchen. We're in the medicine chest. Dr. Amin is here. She's ready to help you with your Yoni, which, okay, all right. All of the areas down there. All right, what inspired you to deal with the Yonis today? And I'm going to drop the link for those of you who have questions. And if fellas, please don't be shy today because you have people in your life with Yonis who you need to know about this. What inspired you, Dr. Armin? And good morning. You look beautiful.
Thank you. I appreciate that. You look wonderful as well. So today, dealing with yonis. First of all, yoni means sacred space or temple of all things from which all things come, right? And so we're talking about the womb. And so when we talk about yoni as a word in Sanskrit, meaning that sacred space that we have as womb space, it's not just the space we can see, with a mirror or from the outside or whatever. The womb is considered in traditional medicine, when we talk about Afro-Asian medicine, the womb is everything connected. So we, unlike Western culture, where there's a fascination with zooming in on what they call the money shot, or just looking at that exterior part, we have to consider it an entire space, with the things behind the curtain, with the great and magnificent Oz, and the things in front of the curtain that are the Emerald City. It's all important. So I figured, because of the number of questions we get about yoni related things, about womb wellness, that today was a perfect day to talk about that. Why not?
Professor Hunter, your mic.
Your mic is off, I think.
I just want to say thank you again because when we sit in class with Carr, we're forced to rethink everything that we thought. And for most of us, we realize how European centric our thinking is. And you both, and Dr. Carr gave, he said this class, if this were on any network channel, would be the absolute best thing on television. And I could not
Oh,
disagree with Dr. Carr about that.
that's quite a compliment coming from him, and you. I think that's wonderful. Thank you very much. Uh, I consider myself a cultural custodian. It's really my job to bring forth this information to remember with our community. So there may be things that we know, and then there may be things that we're not familiar with, and this is an opportunity to share, and that's what community is about. So I really appreciate you setting this space to.
Ashe, Ashe. Why do you think? And before we get into that, I said to you, what you practice is alchemy. It's like the combination and the coming together makes alchemy, and then you spelled it KHEM, and I had, and it's like boom, light bulb, and then you said that's the root of chemistry. So
It,
everything starts with chemit.
everything starts with chem, al-chem, the chem people of black hair and heads, the folks who, the black people of the land. And we don't get to build pyramids by being dummies. You know what I'm saying? We don't get to have structures that still exist, that modern people haven't even dug the sand all the way out and figured out that there are cities under their entire cities and networks. Um, we don't get to do that without knowing math and science and chemistry, history, right? Like this whole idea of knowing and putting together elements, and that's important. And so a lot of what we do here, that we're doing in the kitchen, and sometimes we'll take you in other rooms, sometimes we'll be in the garden, is that the foundational roots of what we're doing, no pun intended, the roots have to do with us setting our chemistry as Cometans in Nubia straight, setting our chemistry back in homeostasis, in balance with both our surroundings and each other. Super important.
Mike, Professor Hunter.
And I keep muting myself because I want to make sure that I don't interrupt. Um, we don't talk about this in our homes growing up, particularly Black people. I don't know if it's the same in the Caribbean. I don't know if it's the same in Africa, but we don't have conversations because I can't remember outside of like when I got my period, and then it's like, here's some tampons and pads, and this is it. You know, now you're a woman. Yeah, go figure it out. Like, and I was just watching, and we'll have this conversation later in Q&A. But you know, the Johnson & Johnson lawsuit of all, and I know there's a lot of Black women in that, because of the talcum powder that we put in, you know, in that area. Like there has to be other things that are root related, Kim related, Nubian related. But I just, you know, having this conversation is so important. And men and women, however you identify yourself, I want to be appropriate. You know, I think these are conversations we should be having with our young people that we don't.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. To that end, you know, when you see these lawsuits of companies that make talcum powder, companies that built their brand on tampons that women are inserting and then having toxic shock syndrome and having to have legs removed and amputated. I mean, it's a big deal. Um, we need to understand that it's not necessarily, and I don't want to go too far into it, but just to come back to the chemistry of Kemet, that our ancestors used tampons. Okay, let's be clear. They were using cotton, because Egyptian cotton, right? We've heard of this with the most luxurious towels, right? And bed sheets, but they used cotton. We've had a long relationship with cotton that is not always painful, and full of trauma. It was a resource to us, just as papyrus and other things. Even the word papyrus goes to make the word paper, right? So these things that were being used by women at that time are chiseled into the walls of these spaces because there's no embarrassment, because they wanted to leave behind a manual, just like we're leaving these things in Nubia. They wanted to say, this is what you need to know 1,000 years, 10,000 years, 20,000 years later. And the idea that there was no shame in it is really why we're here and we're talking about this. It's super important. Half the people on the planet have yonis. Half the people on the planet, right? And everyone who is listening to this came through that doorway. If you didn't make it through that most sacred doorway, which is what Yoni means, right? You didn't get here. Like it just never happened, right? And when we talk about the womb and all parts, it doesn't matter if it was cesarean section, any other thing. You had to have been incubated in this most sacred space. And it was held in such regard that entire temples, entire areas like Dendara, etc. You have temples where you see people with mortar and pestle, right, on the walls. And I have some pictures of me in those spaces, and I'd love to send it to you, and you can post it, you know, from years and years. And they're holding, these women are holding mortar and pestle, or they're huge on the floor, and they're making herbs. This is a pharmacy. It's clearly a pharmacy, but you see them putting herbs in, you see things, plants that somebody else is bringing to the table to make them into medicines. So these are formulary spaces. These are the CVS of old, right? And this is where we get our medicine, and the chemistry of Kemet, the alchem, comes into play. And so our job is to remember that chemistry and use it every day.
All right. So take us through. And today are the 7 herbs to get your Roni right at any age. And I'm glad you threw in at any age.
Any age. Everybody has a yoni. Your mama got a yoni, your sister got a yoni, your auntie that you love, your grandmother who puts $11 in the birthday card she sends you. All right. All these women have yonis. They're all at various ages and stages, and maybe even levels of healing and knowledge. We acknowledge in our traditional cultures the importance of Yoni becoming more mature, of us growing into those spaces, acknowledging that and setting ourselves up for wellness as we go along. So it's super important, right?
One, one more thing, and let me thank you, because we've also been raised to be very immature around these topics and the derogatory names that have been assigned to this. Yoni is it makes so much sense, and as we remember who we were before we got here, and before they indoctrinated us into this very depraved way of thinking about organs and body parts and internal, machinations. Somebody just said I just had to Google what yoni was. If you
Well, I'm glad they did. And I'm so glad you said that. Without bloviating, right? Without blowing up, tooting our own horn, I am proud to say, and you heard it here, that I introduced that word yoni about 25 to 30 years ago in this country. And a lot of people, the goop folk, all kinds of folks, co opted that. And the reason I introduced it was I was studying with Mantak Chia, with all these other masters from Thailand to India, etc., who, astonishingly enough to me, had a bunch of like white men in these classes for sexual kung fu and sexual tai chi, in which I am trained. Um, and I was the only Black woman in those places and spaces. And he not only gave me access to this information, Mantak Chia and his wife Manwin Chia, but took me as like a mentee and really poured information into me that I'm always happy to share with you, not just about the herbs, but the internal exercises and the alchemy of the body that is necessary. People do outward yoga, but there's interior yoga. There's sexual tai chi, sexual kung fu. There's whole sets of classes that I do on that kind of stuff. And it makes a difference. We can't just think about the exterior of what we're seeing. There are whole sets of things going on inside, right?
Okay. So are you going to teach a class in sexual kung fu at some point?
Sure.
Asking for a friend.
I've been teaching that for like 30 years. I'm old school in this. And when I say I'm proud to have introduced that, it's not that I made up that word. It's that I introduced that into classes. And these are principally Black men and women that I was teaching in these classes. And that as that information disseminated, I have a whole class called YONIversity, and it has levels to it, right? That then you see it migrate into this white space where Gwyneth Paltrow or whoever it is talking about jade eggs and yoni, this and that. I was the person who brought that to this country because Mantak Chia was mining those eggs. He's a master in bone marrow, kung fu, like all these things you can think of, these inner alchemy practices. He grew up in a temple from 5 years old in Thailand and felt it was necessary to give me the information. And he told me that the reason he taught me was he felt that people of color were going to be the ones to hold it closest to the way that it was supposed to be. And that we had the patience when he noticed that when he went to do a speaking engagement, and maybe there were a few people of color there, Black folk, Black women and men, that they took it seriously. They really practiced. And everybody else was just there to say that they were there. So when we look at that, we look at the fact that everybody recognizes us. We have to recognize ourselves, that this information belongs to us. And sometimes the messenger doesn't look like you think they will, but they do. So I would love to teach more of the internal practices too, to folks. I've been doing this a long time, so I would love to.
Eternal. All right. So what do we have before you, Dr. Amen?
Today we're going to talk about the herbs. I did 8 because was it 9? I did 9. I did 8 plus 1. It's the funky bunch. We did
funky 9 plus
funky
1
9
more.
plus 1 more. So because we are hip hop, right? So what I want to do is I'm going to roll through these really quickly, and then if people have questions, because I get a lot of questions in our DMs, and I want to make sure that people can utilize this forum that is amazing, that is Nubia, that you have built, that people can hop up on the stage in a bonnet and ask a question. I love that. All right. So we're going to start down here with, and I'm just going to cruise through these. And if we have specific questions, this one is Damiana. And Ali has been kind enough, our shop manager and our media manager here, to write on these for you, right? So Damiana is a really incredible herb that is great for balancing hormones. The things that I'm going to show you are pretty much for anyone at any age, except people who may be expecting. If you're a person who is pregnant, there may be some things, and I'll give you warnings on which ones are not appropriate. So Damiana is one of those traditional herbs that is fabulous for women's health, and you'll see it in Afro-Asian formulary. Is very happy. He's jumping out, and you'll see that in there. And what I'm going to do is start putting some of these things in here for you. Oh, am I supposed to put it in here, Ali? Okay. Ali gave me instructions, and I didn't pay attention. All right, so I'm gonna put some things in here so you can see them really well. Okay. Here we have some red raspberry leaf, and a lot of people are familiar with red raspberry leaf. But the first thing I would like to say is it does not taste anything like raspberries. It's very earthy. It has I want to say a green kind of smell and taste to it, if that makes sense. What we call that in herbalism is vegetal. It has a very vegetal taste, like a grassy green sort of taste. It's the leaf. It's not the flower. It's not the berry. And a lot of times we're attached to something has to be salty, sweet, sour, for us to be interested. But we need to decolonize our tongues by having all kinds of flavors. And so red raspberry leaf is one of those womb toners, they call it. It helps to tone the uterine musculature. Now listen, if you are listening to this and you've had a hysterectomy or ovariohysterectomy, whatever it is, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't have these things. In fact, you should. A lot of male physicians went through life, because if you think about it, modern medicine as we know it in the Western world is very young, right? It wasn't but 100 years ago they were putting leeches on people. Never forget. Always remember the black humors and the red humors and they were talking. You understand what I'm saying? So when we look at modern medicine, it has amazing diagnostic tools, unbeatable MRIs and all of the X-rays, and I mean it's unbeatable in being able to see. But in terms of preventative, or in terms of understanding why women's health is particularly important, I mean, that's why we have blue pills, right, for men. But what happens with women, even for pleasure, right? Even for our wellness of our wombs, of our yonis, those sacred spaces, so little exists. And oftentimes women are recommended, especially women of color, to ovariohysterectomies and hysterectomies in general, or myomectomies to remove fibroids, or right, wholesale, recommended to it wholesale. And we have to look at what we can do to avoid those circumstances. And if we have found ourselves there, it's no fault of our own. Release that tension and stress about that. And instead understand that the womb has a purpose. Even if it has been removed, it would have helped balance your hormones some. So it's important still to do these things. You dig? Does that make sense?
Perfect sense.
Okay. So just because they say, oh, well, are you going to have children? Oh, well, no. Or have you had children? Oh, okay. Yeah, I did. All right, let's cut it out. That is not the answer, is what I'm saying, right?
Why are they so quick to remove tonsils, gallbladders? I mean, it's like organs are there for a reason, and they all have they talk to each other. Oh, you don't need your spleen. Well, then why do I have it? You don't need your appendix. Well, why is it in my body?
Right.
Why do they just want to take out our organs? It's weird.
There are a few reasons for that. We'll make a shorthand by saying that if you haven't done preventative care, it gets to a place where nothing else can happen. Let's liken it to tooth care, right?
Mm.
And if you don't address a cavity, right? Like if you went to your dentist and you're like, I have a cavity, and they're like, come back when it's, you need a root canal, or come back and we'll yank it out. That's the equivalent of what's being said to you is there's nothing we can really do about that right now. It's like the cops. Well, the person didn't commit the crime. They showed up your house with zip ties and a mask outside your door, but they didn't do anything. So, and instead of waiting for a crime of body, of surgery, of ever escalating medical interventions, right? We're instead going to take back our alchemy, our chem, right? And our chemistry is up to us ultimately, right?